know other mentor moms that maybe you haven't met yet, and also just the collective wisdom in this group is incredible. So we want to all have a chance to hear together what they have to say on a few different topics that we as a group brought up as questions that we wanted to hear from. So, but before we get into questions, there's a little slideshow here. It's just, there's a slide for each mentor mom that has some pictures of their family, and I'm just gonna let them each take a minute and share about like who they are and who their kids are, who their husband is, whatever they want to share about their family. So we will, is it the green button?
Yeah, you just go to the side, like on the right. Yep. Okay.
Everybody to the back. Oh no, there we go.
All
Alright, who's first?
Hi, I'm Lee Barcy. This is my family. Steve and I met in college. We went to University of Illinois, so I've known him since I was 20 years old. So going on several decades. We dated for 5 years, so even though we're celebrating our 34th anniversary this spring, it's been 39 years of knowing him, so that's lucky me. But we moved here in 1994. Steve is a physician with UW and the VA, and so we moved here for his last bit of his training, his fellowship. So we never left. We've been part of Blackhawk ever since, the whole time, so going on 29 years with Blackhawk. These are my 3 kids. I wanted to put in a picture what they looked like when they were almost I was one of the original members of the predecessor to this group. This was MOPS now, it was Moms, and it was Titus before that, so I was in the founding group of that back in '94, so my kids all went through that. So up on the top part, Amelia is our youngest. She is turning 28 this in 2 weeks. Natalie is our oldest in the middle. She is now a teacher in Denver. She teaches kindergartners, but she had taught for 8 years 4K in Milwaukee. And then Stephen is our son on the right, and he just turned 30, and he's married. And he and his wife live up in Wapaka in the woods and make syrup and live off the land, and so it's kind of neat. So, and that's what they look like. Obviously, the terrace picture is what they generally look right now, and that's Vanessa, who's in the front left. My daughter-in-law, who grew up in Green Bay, but they met at college. Yeah, that's just kind of crazy pictures at my parents' house when they were younger. But yeah, background on me, I was a stay-at-home mom for the time that I raised my kids, but before that I was in advertising and marketing and a copywriter. And I enjoy sports and art and just mainly being outside and beauty, so photography. Anything else I can say?
Thank you so much, Lee. Alright, the next one is Debbie. And Debbie doesn't know what photos are out there because I stole them from her. So it's not Debbie's fault that she's looking at these for the first time.
Thank you, Abby, for putting those in. The reason she had to do that is because I didn't supply her with any. I'm Debbie Schweiss. My husband, Tom Schweiss, you might know Mr. Tom from Be Kids. He does some of those tapes and also is in the Sunday school room. But our first date was junior prom. And so we have been dating and married, it is almost 50 years now. And we met in high school, that's where junior prom was. We came to Madison in 1984, and that's when we started raising our family. And right next to Tom is our son Andy, he's 38, and the back is Becky, and she's 36, and next to me is Jenny, and she's 33. So we had 3 children, and now we have 5 grandchildren. And the oldest is 5, and the youngest is 11 months. 4 boys, 1 girl. This is Rowan right here. Tom has Rowan. I have Charlie. Next to me is Emmett and Josh and Grant. This was Christmas, trying to get a Christmas pajama picture. This is the best we got. Grant on the end was rebelling, I guess. He didn't know where his. But once we got to Madison, I was a stay-at-home mom as well until our kids went to school. My training is in social work and financial counseling, and I did that before we came here. And then once the kids went to school, I worked 3/4 time at a financial institution, training the credit card platform both internally and externally. So, grandparenthood is a joy, you know, that's where the payoff really is.
I'm Judy, my husband is Ted, and we have 4 sons. Ted and I met in college, we've been married 52 years, and we raised our family in Indiana, just moved up here about 2.5 years ago. And we do live in a 3-generational family home up here with one of our sons. So you may recognize 2 of our sons do attend Blackhawk, so some of you may be able, can you pick them out, Steph? And this picture in the middle was when we only had 1 grandchild, but we have 8 now. If I can ever find the one picture I have of all the 8 grandchildren, I'll bring it around and show you. So our oldest son is the next to the right standing, and he's Ken, and then on the left is Joel. And in the middle, next to the beautiful young woman in red, is Brad and his wife Melissa. Many of you know Melissa and Brad. And then clear to the right is Nick and his wife, his beautiful wife, Melissa. So we have two Melissas. She is sitting on the right in blue. Ken's wife is Carissa, holding little Hannah. And Jen is the daughter-in-law who's married to Joel on the left. Get everybody? Okay. All right. I loved raising children. It was a joy to me, but I've never forgotten any challenges, and just love being able to experience the mentor mom experience, and also meeting with women individually, one-to-one, has been a joy. Before I retired, I was a bookkeeper for many years at our church. Prior to that, had been a stay-at-home mom, doing some other part-time jobs as well. I think I've got everything covered.
Awesome, thank you so much. All right, last but certainly not least is Colleen.
Okay, so I'm Colleen Kalanjanin. On the far left is our wedding day, and a very, very hot day in North Dakota. I met my husband Brad at Asbury University, which has been in the news a lot lately with the recent revival. But anyway, he was going to be a pastor, and I was going to be a music teacher, and I really, really hoped he could preach. At this point, I didn't know if he could or not. I was going to spend the rest of my life with him. That's on the left. There is our summer. Where in summers we were from Michigan for 40 years, and that's on Lake Michigan in Ludington. So he's a summer spiritual director there on a resort. So it's not horrible, but I will miss Wisconsin when I go. So I was not able to have, we were not able to have biological children, so we adopted. And my daughter, Kaylee, she came to me from Korea to a plane on a plane from Detroit, or to Detroit, excuse me. I got the bonus baby. She was over 21 pounds at 4 months old. And they called it a happy Buddha, all the passengers. But as you can see, she's changed. This is Kaylee, and 3 years later, we adopted Ben, okay? And then they live in Wisconsin, my daughter. That's the reason we're here. And my granddaughter, Avery, and that's her family there. Avery is just turned 5, and Maddox just about to turn 3. And this is Kaylee's husband, Mitch. They are small group leaders in here at Fitchburg Blackhawks. So, and that's my son Ben, as a grown-up now, and he lives in Muskegon, Michigan. So I was a music teacher, elementary for many, many years, and then eventually I graduated to middle school. Woo! Right near the end of my retirement for 7 years, so. But when I was in elementary, when my kids were little, I was only part-time. It was real important to me to be home. My husband was a church planter. We started a church like you guys did back then, and so it's a lot of teamwork and effort. And so anyway, I'm glad to be a mentor mom. I was always grateful when people came alongside me, and so I'm glad there's any chance to give back. So thank you.
We'll just pass the mic. But, all right, so last week, or 2 weeks ago, we had papers where you guys were able to submit some questions, and then a couple more came in over email. And they kind of all distilled down to 3 major topic areas. One of them was kind of faith and spirituality. One of them was your marriage, and one was kids. So I kind of grouped the questions together a little bit, and we're just gonna see how many we can get through. But the first topic area that we're gonna start with is kind of the faith and spirituality. And so one of the questions that was really a good one, I think, is briefly share a season in your life when God surprised you and what you learned in that time. So whoever wants to start.
I've got the mic, I'll go for it.
Okay,
So of course I'll get a little emotional, but I always do, sorry. I noted, thank you, I noted the death of my mother when I was 13, serious depression for my husband in our middle adult life, or middle raising kids life, an unexpected job loss, and even my own waywardness along the way. Bottom line, God's faithfulness is what surprised me, Dad. In all of those things, God is so faithful. I'm sorry. I usually can recover. And the second thing is, then in the more recent years, as I've stepped out in faith and obedience, really doubting my own capabilities, I have still been so surprised when I see that God really does want to use me. And I think that's true for all of us. Those are surprises. I mean, we should not be surprised, maybe, but God is truly so faithful and does want to use us.
So the season that I chose was the adoption of Kaylee, because number one, it was a surprise that we weren't able to have children. Doctors said, we don't know why. You're the 5% we can't explain. Okay, well, what are you gonna do with that? Then we were out of money because of doctors. So we thought, well, we have to just save now. And you can do in vitro, but we chose adoption. It was a sure thing. I thought, what if in vitro doesn't work? Can't afford to do it and try again. So anyway, we had no money, and we were just going to go with that. And then one day a courier came to the door, and there was a check for $5,000 from 4 anonymous families. To this day, I don't know who they are. And so we were on our way. Back then, it was not whatever the number is now. So that was enough. We started to go for a Colombian baby through a group in Ohio. It's a long story. But right when we were about 3 months away or less, the orphanage in Columbia canceled anyone from Michigan for some odd reason. No explanation, just it's over. So we went back to the adoption agency that we had gone with and said, could you put us on your Korean list? And thinking that would be at the back starting all over again, another 9 months. Turns out they put us on the list where we would have been had we done the adoption through the original group in Michigan. And so when all of a sudden she said, I'm calling you in a few days with your assignment. And so a little Kaylee came from Korea, and it was the exact time we would have gotten a child from Colombia. So during her teenage years, I always had that affirmation that, honey, you're supposed to be with me. Number one, information, but, my point in that is God is faithful to direct you. When you ask for him to direct, you can make all kinds of mistakes, but he still makes it right for you. And he's faithful, as you said.
You have to excuse me, as a copywriter, so I write my answers down, I'm not very confident in my delivery, so I apologize if I am reading what I wrote down, but I didn't give much thought to it, so, what I came up with, is that, let's see, before my kids were born, I worked in advertising marketing as a copywriter. I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom though, so I was very grateful that I was able to do that. However, as many of you know, that comes with a lot of unforeseen challenges. That time in my life stretched me more than I could ever imagine. There were definitely joys of seeing firsthand all the things that my kids learned, because I had a front seat to it, because I was with them 24/7. However, I never thought before motherhood that I would struggle with anger, impatience, and frankly, contentment. Contentment, I found, is key to savoring our lives and not wishing away the moments. So in order to preserve the memories of the moment, I believe one thing is important, that you need to be content, as I said. If you're in a state of discontentment, you'll miss the joy at the moment at hand. I have struggled with contentment. Discontentment has at times made me a bitter person. It is one of Satan's strongest tools. But victory is ours when we choose contentment over discontentment. And so, I know you kind of asked us about Bible verses in another place, but Philippians 4:11 I clung to a lot, which is, I learned to be content in all circumstances. And that's in any stage of life. And so what I was learning then is as applicable then as it is now. Because I think often as young moms, you're always wishing for that next step. You know, you get to like, oh, I just wish they could walk. I wish they could do this. I wish they could, get out of the terrible twos and things. But where you are so wishing in a way, you just can't enjoy it. So my advice would be to treasure each stage, and the time goes fast, as you guys have all been told, I'm sure, and maybe get tired of hearing. And you can't turn back time on that. And also, contentment transcends the grass is always greener circumstances. I say don't negatively compare your circumstance with others. Sometimes, someone always has it better or easier. In our shorter work hours, better vacations, more attentive husbands, perfect kids, etc. But also remember there are so many with far less. Remember to be grateful what we have versus what we don't have. And another point is that everyone and everything else will at some point disappoint us. As Christ followers, we are to find our joy and sense in well-being in an unchanging God rather than our changing circumstances. And so I just learned to be more dependent on God and to give him my worries, my fears, my stress, and whatever I was feeling. And one other good verse that I had, and that was cease striving, or many of you guys know about is be still and know that I'm God. Because I'm a striver. I always wanted to have that list, and I was a go person, and I just needed to pause and to recognize God's voice in my life and cling to him. And he could just turn around any circumstance, of what I was feeling. Steve had long hours with training and working at a university. It never got better, he was all still pointing to students. So I was kind of a single mom. Even though single mom who shared a bed at night is kind of what I would say. He would come home, but I was kind of responsible for that. So I just had to take my choice of whether I was going to stay resentful and all this stuff, or be content and find a better way. So those are my biggest lesson.
Alright. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Do you want to go to another question?
No, go ahead. I'm
Okay.
so sorry. I was
The
just
time God surprised me is our oldest was 3, and then Becky was 1. And I was at home, stay-at-home mom, and I just said, Tom, I think I have to go back to work. And he said, what? And I said, I really think I just need to, go back to work. I think I'm just getting frustrated and this, And so he said, well, if that's what you think you need, it will make things harder for us, because he worked, a 60, 70-hour-week job. He traveled internationally, and he said, this isn't going to be easy, but if it's what you want, we'll find a way to make it work. So I applied for a job and got called for an interview, and the night before, the Lord just spoke to me. He's like, Debbie, what are you doing? You've got a beautiful family, and if you add this to your plate, it's gonna be so much stress that, you know, if you just, the best choice for you really is just, you've been blessed with the opportunity to stay home with your kids, and, that's kind of the way I created your family. That's what's, I think is good for you. Not that it's for everybody, but for me. And so I accepted that. And just the joy of it was after that, any want to go back to work just left me. It's like I kind of went down the path, got to opening the door, decided that wasn't for me, for our family, didn't do it. Never regretted that decision. I'm so thankful for my husband that he let me make those choices and try to get to that point. And it was just a total surprise because I thought I wanted to be in the working world, and it just went worlds to setting my contentment. Like how lucky I am to be able to have this. Not that there aren't bad days, terrible days that you wish you were any place but where you were, but over the long haul, it was just thank you, Lord, for not letting me make that terrible mistake.
All right, another question that we had in this spirituality area was what worked well, or just what worked well for your family, I should say. Like habits, practices, resources for discipling your kids. And funny thing, somebody misunderstood it as disciplining your kids, but I also think is totally relevant. So if you have advice on what worked well for disciplining your kids, I'd love to hear that. Discipling for discipline.
Well, I called both my kids, because I thought what I think we did, maybe they don't agree. You know, and what they remember is different. And it was both humbling and affirming. We got some of both, but both of them said things like, live out your faith in front of your kids, and model what you hope that they will do with themselves someday. And one of the things my daughter suggested, and I'm gonna just be honest about who said what, but she said conversational prayer, and it was one thing that we did, like at the dinner table, teach them to pray because he's our Father. So I know she does a lot of popcorn prayers, where you say your little one thing and popcorn daddy, popcorn mommy, and it just really is an easy way to teach them. A lot of times I prayed out loud. I felt like the good and the bad needed to be, my kids needed to hear, and you know, losing my keys suddenly and finding them and thanking God for that in the spot. I talked out loud a lot, and they said that meant something to them. I don't know if you have kids with anxiety at all. Your kids are too little for that maybe, but my son had extreme anxiety and he could never sleep. So at night, he asked me to, when it was prayer time, he said, could you just keep praying? So I learned to just kneel by his bed and just keep praying until he was asleep. And actually, I needed the prayer anyway. So I started out with his things and I ended up with, you know, where I needed to go in my life. So that worked out. Another thing they both mentioned, which you don't think kids are noticing these things, but I had a job that started at 7:20 in the morning, and I had to get up at 5, so they both remember me sitting by the fireplace in my pink robe, you know, at ungodly hours. They thought, you know, and my son literally said, we thought you were so stupid because, you know, you're always complaining about how tired you were, and yet you get up at 5, what are you doing? And then he said, and then I realized it was your fuel. I just can't even believe he said that or even noticed it, but anyway, so they noticed these things. My daughter said, start with your devotions with the kids early, and I'm sure you're probably already doing that, but that is so important. And okay, this is the last one I have. My daughter said, don't think all or nothing when it comes to going to church. And she said, sometimes, why does everything go wrong on Sunday morning? Like, the breakfast is all over the floor. You can't find anything to wear. You finally find something to wear, and the kid spits on it. You just can't seem to get out the door. And both kids remember that we were late a lot, you know. And she says, even if you're 15 minutes late, just just go anyway, because it tells your kids this is so important to us to worship in community. And your kids really, really need that too. And I'll just tell you how bad I got. I mean, one time I literally, so much chaos at home, I got to church, I had 2 different shoes on, and one had a heel. It was so bad. But it was, my husband was a pastor, so he was already there. But, you know, anyway, so we were there, but they remember that it didn't matter. We got there eventually. So I'm going to encourage you, even after post-COVID, to just make that effort. Okay.
Well, for me, top for me was scripture memorization. I know not everybody, takes that up as a habit. It has been a habit for me throughout my life, but our kids have the privilege of, in our church, of a program that really engaged them, and through it, they memorized a lot of scripture. And I just think that is the most transformative thing. Getting spirituality from the outside is one thing, and we do the best we can, but getting it from the inside, from God's Word, has so much power. So any way you can do that, I highly recommend that. I put down honest conversations as kids get older. It's really important. I could look for ways to do this at the dinner table. Don't miss this perfect opportunity. Dinner table talk. Look for good ideas, resources to help you to find something that works for you. But don't think you'll always have more opportunities for this. The time you have while they're still open and schedule available is short, and it won't get easier as they get older. But those conversations, I mean, if you just are in the habit of conversations with kids about stuff, about life, it's much easier when the conversations are come at you out of the blue, or late at night they come to you or something like that, or there's a conflict to work through. It's much easier if you build that.
For me, discipling my kids was hit or miss, but when I was at my best, I was attending Bible studies, and we'd get the kids into summer Bible school, we'd do our devotions and whatever, so much so I was cooking dinner one day, and I look in the dining room, and my oldest son had all 3 of them in a circle with their Bibles out there, having Bible study. They couldn't read, but they were having Bible study, and I thought, that's not a bad thing, that for them to do that. And with devotions, I bought a book. We're going to sit down, we're going to do devotions, we're going to do this, because that's what good Christian families do, is we have devotions. And as I said, we were hit and miss, and the first one we had, it was titled, We're Moving to Albany. And my kids always remembered that, so when we would come back to devotions after missing a couple of days, they'd always say, are we moving to Albany? And so, I guess, like Colleen said, if you're late, don't sweat it, just get there. And if you miss some days in devotions, don't sweat it, just get there. Remember, more is caught than is taught. They're just watching how you handle your spiritual life, and they pick up on a lot of it, so, yeah.
And I don't have much to say because I was the one who interpreted it. Discipline. And I'm the contractor. Watch out. But I guess what I thought about, I can't remember who I was mentioning to it earlier today, that my kids lived at church growing up. Not necessarily that because of their own reason, because I wanted to live at church. I, was looking for opportunities to have friendships and stuff like that. So I did Blackhawks Bible Study, that used to be Lead and County, now it's Blackhawk Bible Study. I did that since they were little, and I coupled that with Titus and stuff, and so they kind of lived, and then they also were involved with Awana when Blackhawk used to have Awana. So they lived a lot in the church nursery. They developed friendships in the church nursery, and then they developed into, when they participated with Awana, with together, and I'll go to another thought on that later on about sparky marriage type, that enters into that. So they were exposed to a lot, which maybe it wasn't doing this, I'm not very good at devotions at home, I tried, a lot of failed attempts and stuff, but we had a great leader with our mom-to-mom group who poured into us. She's the one who founded the group, and she would have different devotions and stuff that I would bring home. But so I guess I'm just saying that they learned a lot being in the environment that I put them in, and then the friendships, and that everyone was doing this, so they weren't complaining like, well, so-and-so's not going, because their friends were the people they would see in the nursery. So. And then Grace came into the discipling part later on. That's for later discussion.
All right, so let's move on to talking a little bit about marriage. So there's two questions here, and I'm gonna just read them both, and you guys can kind of choose how you want to respond. But the first question is, what helped keep the spark alive in your marriage with all the things going on, kids, jobs, etc.? And then the second question is, how do you resist resenting your husband when you feel like he carries so much of the mental load? Or like, how do you deal with resentment toward your husband in a Christ-like way, but still be gracious to your own frustrations or sadness? So keeping the spark alive and dealing with resentment.
All right, first one, the spark alive. This kind of goes back to what I was just referring to. When we first moved when we moved to Madison, 2 of our kids were here and 1 was soon to be on the way. And we've been involved with Blackhawks since day 1. And so we met some couples, and they approached us whether we wanted to do a babysitting co-op. And I know maybe some of my people who have had me in the past or have me now that I've talked about that. But so there were 4 couples. And so, so each Saturday night, 3 of the 4 couples would have a date night. The other couple would watch all the kids. We drop them off at 5:30 and we pick them up at 11. They play and they bed down until the parents pick them up. The kids were generally around the same age. All were friends from various Blackhawk activities. So they were Awana, they were church nursery, they were Sunday school. All together, get this, there were 10 kids, 3 boys and 7 girls. I know that sounds crazy, but they mostly entertained themselves. They were friends. It was like having a play group. And then, they got to have a mini sleepover, we'd have cribs for the babies, and they would have sleeping bags for and they would hang out in the summertime. Heck, we'd live at the park and then come back for a snack and bedtime and all. 3 of the 4 Saturday nights, we were out 5 hours, no paying for babysitter. The kids were having fun. It was wonderful. And so your day could be for any purpose. I said, be creative, think outside the box, and you didn't even have to leave the home. So hint, hint, if you're looking for other ways to keep sparking your marriage, you had a built-in babysitter and they weren't at home. So, it was wonderful. So I encourage you guys, I've been a mentor for 12 years now, and I say this every single time to my group, find ways that's a great way to nurture your marriage, but also find lasting friendships. And so they were just 3 fellow moms that I met in Titus, your mom's group, that have become close friends, over time. It segued when the kids got more involved with activities. It dropped down to 2 couples, but we still made it work, 2 of the 4 Saturdays and stuff. So just an idea on that part. But the other things that I had as far as keeping the spark alive is that when we would go out on a date, it was our date. The rule was we did not talk about the kids. That is hard to do, especially when you're a mom and that's your time to I need to get your opinion on that. But we wanted our goal to be, we're concentrated on each other. We're concentrated, go back to, I said, we started dating when we were 20 and 21 years old. There was plenty of life in there before we had kids, a couple years later. So it was that was one of our goals. And a couple other things. Invest in one another, keep your relationship a priority. One day the kids will grow up and you don't want to look across the table and say, who are you? Be intentional, be spontaneous as much as life allows. Find things you enjoy doing together, stay active. So it's nice to have his and her things and your own priorities, but find something that you guys can unite with and go with it. Guard your time together, be available for each other. So for me, my activities and the crazy life that I lived as a young mom were daytime hours that I just filled my time knowing that those precious hours when Steve was home were our time, or the weekend, you know, whenever I could have it, I wanted to be there. So that was how it worked for our family. Your life might look totally different. Remember why you fell in love with each other. Foster those characteristics and moments. Lift each other up in prayer. Find ways to express your appreciation. Know their love language and how receiving appreciation in those areas could spark romance. And work on emotional intimacy. I think people are so concentrated on sexual intimacy, they forget that emotional intimacy, I think, is the most important thing in your life, because if that is right, if you feel like you're being understood and you understand your partner, and you can go to that person and talk about not only the great things, but your fears and your things that are going on, that will certainly enhance every other part of your life and stuff, and you'll be attracted to that person, and romance can follow when you feel like that's been done. So those are my ideas on that part.
I'll go to the other question about, how to handle resentment, and I think it's difficult, but we each have different things we worry about. Like in our family, like maybe the person who put the question together, was kind of in charge of the kids and had a lot of the worries and figuring out how that was all gonna work, whereas my husband didn't have that much. But on the flip side, he worried about being that our family was financially solid, that we could make the mortgage payments and whatever. And I just remember one time, I just didn't understand how important that was to him. We had a nice home, but I saw on the paper this lake home, and I always wanted to live in the lake, and so I just remember this so clearly. He's in London on a business trip, and I decide to go call this realtor and go see this lake. And then he calls me that night, "How was your day?" And I said, "Oh, I went to see this lake home, I think we should buy it." And he's like, "What?" And he said, "I don't think this is really the place for this conversation." He's in London and I was here, and he came back and he said, I don't know if you realize the pressure, of making sure that we have enough money, and then when you're going out looking at lake homes, it just," he said, "if I happen to lose my job, I still want to be able to be there for my family and whatever." And I just never understood that, but after that, I didn't look at lake homes anymore. But it was just, my pressures were with the family and things like that, and I resented possibly him for not having that same scope of responsibility, even though he did it a different way. And he probably said, "Here's my wife, I'm working across the sea, she's out looking at lake homes, spending money." So I guess we have different things, that we worry about, and the emotional intimacy, if we can share that. And I really didn't understand how you felt about that. I know you're making good money, you get good raises, we could afford it. And he said, "Yes, we could, but if I would lose my job, that would be a problem." And he did lose his job twice, so it was wise counsel.
Okay, well, I don't have a lot. I just, we were so busy planning this church, and so we did get a couple big vacations. Brad's brother was a pastor at the American Church of Paris, and so finally, after the brother had been there 10 years, we went year 9, I think, or maybe 10. I'm like, and literally opened the bedroom window, there was an Eiffel Tower. So, but on that trip, and then we went to Korea one time to visit the largest churches in the world, and they were in Korea. But I remember sitting on that bus with Brad, and our kids were old enough they weren't babies, so I could leave them. But I remember thinking, I kind of forgot how fun you were, And he always had such a great sense of humor, but it just had gotten lost, in all this stuff. And we had so much fun. And so you can all do it to get away for even a short bit, trip where you just remember why you fell in love to begin with. And we did really cheap things. We didn't always have a lot of money. We would do $5 and $10 days at the mall, and even took our kids when they were a little bit older. So we gave ourselves an hour. It sounds like this maybe we had a lot of fun just, buying goofy things for each other. And I was gonna say marriage getaways. I know a couple here that, I've not done this, but, there are places like the resentment question. I think sometimes you really just need a third party to talk through with you. And, there's places where that you can go for an entire weekend and you just have a dedicated couple that talk you through everything about your marriage. And I know this couple came back completely refreshed in their marriage. And so, just, I had no idea that was quite out there, so it is.
Alright,
Oh, I've got one, or
yeah, go.
I'll jump on the second question if I can find my answer. Series that one, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah, I did have, I had mentioned before, I did have to work through that resentment type stuff. Because, as I mentioned, I was a stay-at-home mom, so it was a 24/7, and I didn't have the ability to leave. I guess my biggest struggle was, or jealousy I had with Steve, is that he could leave the home, go to a work environment, have adult conversations, actually finish a sentence. Even to this day, I don't think I can complete sentences and stuff. I just talk in phrases. And when he came home, you know, not that he could leave all his cares at work, but he came home to a different environment. So I was kind of jealous of that. And so, what else did I write down here? Yeah, so we could separate how does work and home environments. I struggled a lot with sadness and resentment. And at times, this kind of, sorry if I cried. I grew up with a mom. I loved my mom. She was a great mom. She was a Christian, all sorts of, but she struggled with alcohol and self-dependence or self-medication type stuff for various reasons. She grew up with a sister with deep mental health issues and stuff in an area where they didn't, you know, in the 50s, 40s, and 50s, where it wasn't recognized, it wasn't talked about. So there's a lot of baggage that caused her to choose what she chose. And the stresses of motherhood, I could feel at that time, identify with her, that stress of why she went the way that she did. But knowing the consequences of being raised in a family like that, it was kind of our secret in our family. No one knew she would struggle with alcohol outside her family, but I had to, when I had those feelings that she must have felt about being misunderstood, or the stressors and stuff that I felt as a young mom, I had to really battle not to pick up a glass of wine or beer. I like drinking, don't get me wrong, I don't abstain from drinking, but I had to really control that. So those resentments, I had to like, okay, what's my healthy choice that I am gonna pick so that I don't repeat that pattern? And so what I said, I had to do a 180. I had to really think about changing those resentments into gratitude. I know that sounds really weird, but I had to look at, as I mentioned before, I had to be grateful that Steve had a job that provided enough for our family that I could stay home. I always wanted to stay home. It wasn't like I was forced saying, oh, okay, I've got the lesser job and I'm gonna stay home. That's a job I always wanted. I didn't want to be a career person. And so I had to choose to learn to be content. I had to look for ways that God could honor that and be thankful that, and I had to look, besides being jealous of Steve, I had to look and say, he is missing out on so much. He would love to be home. I remember when we were dating, we were talking about how many kids we wanted and stuff, and he came up with a bigger number than I ever thought of. He goes, and guess what, I want to stay home and I want to raise them. I'm like, oh no, you are not allowed to do that. You're in med school, you're gonna waste all that time. I'm gonna do that. So I had to laugh at that because he would have loved to have done that. So I had to just really change it around and say, God, I need to find ways to support my husband, to be grateful. And what else did I write down here? I had to remember that I was working for the Master. I had helped shape, I was being chosen to work alongside God to help shape the next generation, and the best way that I could do that. But I also say that too, it doesn't mean not expressing your emotions if warranted. I think couples, you need to share what's going on. You know, there was some times that I would not share with Steve that how resentful I was, but like it's not beneficiary, it's something I have to work through in my own mind. But there are things that you have to, that is only fair to share. Like I had depression issues with, one time I mentioned before, with a deep one where I was actually considering just walking in Lake Monona, saying no one's gonna notice me and stuff like that. And I had a choice to make that time to bring it up to Steve later that day and say, this is where I'm at, you know? And so we talked through it, and I've been fine ever since, just for the fact that I was able to talk through it. That may not be the easy answer for whatever, but I'm just saying that if you struggle with issues like you're the primary caregiver and it's, you know, bringing negative feelings, work through it, try to find gratitude and do 180s and how I could then honor Steve and say, how can I help you, because you're allowing me to do what I do. So it's a mind shift ultimately, like that's what I was saying. So, oh, practice self-care. I know that's mentioned a lot too, that I had to, and I would, that, I mean, body and soul. So I chose to be involved with our YMCA. They've also been members of that since 1994, so I would do classes whenever I could. Had a great nursery, pushed the kids in the nursery, or I did it when they were in school. And then also spiritual care. I was involved, as I said, with the Titus group, the Young Moms group, which was such a wonderful thing, being in the same places as everyone else in the same moment of life. We had an opportunity to have a group like that also for spouses of residents and or medical trained people. So I had a play group with those women. I had a Bible study with those women. And then I also had the Bible study at church. So it was very important for me to be able to have principles like that spoken into me, and so that I could find healthy ways to manage the stress and be transformed.
All right.
Well, I was just gonna say, I just passed on that because everyone else did such a great job, and also because I would say, I think the word, I finally identified, I think the word spark is a bit of a hallmarky concept, maybe, and I think, you know, you covered it so well in terms of dealing with keeping the marriage alive, so I don't want to add anything.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to give you the opportunity. All right. We are gonna just really quickly touch on one last topic area, and we're definitely not gonna get through all these questions, even though I wish we could, because this is so good. But just so you guys know, there's a list of all the questions that were submitted on your tables, and so table leaders, if you guys want to, you can refer back to those and maybe use that to help guide your discussion a little bit if there's topics that maybe you didn't cover and want to, or just things that you want to think about more or discuss as a group. So the whole list of questions is on your tables. But the last topic area that we hadn't quite gotten to yet was kids. And I know it all kind of runs together, but a couple of the questions that stood out was, one of them was, what do you wish you would not have worried about so much when you had young kids? And did you see things work out for them in that area over time? And then kind of hand in hand with that is some of our group have really little kids, some of us have a span of kids, and one of the questions was, if those of us with older kids that are growing up and approaching transitioning to middle school or teenage years, how did you cope with that transition, or how did that transition go as we move out of the pre-K age and into the elementary and middle school years? So, any thoughts on either of those questions about what you wish you wouldn't have worried about so much if things work out, and kind of how to cope with transition?
Just one small example, when my girls were young, it was so much fun to dress them. We would bring them to the closet and say, you're gonna wear this, and they did it. And they did it for maybe longer than girls do nowadays. But when my daughter got into 4th grade, she said, Mom, I don't wanna wear these dresses. And we had these beautiful dresses. They were hand-me-downs from cousins, and they were gorgeous dresses, and I was like, oh boy. I said, but okay, I get it, but you have all these beautiful dresses, you have to wear a dress at least once a week. And so that was kind of our compromise. And it is hard seeing these little ones just have opinions of their own and become middle schoolers, or maybe Colleen, you're the expert, you taught middle schoolers. But it's just kind of an interesting opportunity to be creative with giving them chances to spread their wings a little bit and decide. I know one silly thing we did, taking our kids out to restaurants, when they got old enough to understand, we said, you know, if you don't buy a soda or a drink, we'll give you $1. You know, if you just have water with your meal. And so it's your choice. If you want to have that, you have it. But if you don't, you get $1. And remember, this was like 20 years ago. Nowadays, kids would go, $1. I need at least 2 to do that. But I mean, creative things like that give them some of the decision-making processes. And I think it's frustrating. Nobody has all the answers. But I just, all of you know that you're doing an amazingly fantastic job, and that if you're worried about doing a good enough job, to me, that means you are, because you're thinking about it. The ones I worry about are moms who don't worry about anything, and maybe they should be.
On the first one about what did you worry about more, what came to my mind immediately, and I hope I can explain it well, but I put educational excellence. And I think as much as I think that's important, I think I realize now our goal was always thinking a lot. We were thinking spiritually too, but we voiced how important, you know, the good job, the stable job, the this and that, you know, really equals prosperity. And prosperity can numb you to God. I really can see looking back, and I'm proud of all 4 of our sons. I think they're great, but I just see that, you know, we can only serve one master. And I just think that the character and the values that I wish, that I look back and I think that form the heart to a true, single-focused devotion to God, those are really even more important. Somebody who didn't make the top of their class, they're doing fine in this world if they have a good family upbringing with the values and the training that you're doing in your family. I hope I've explained what you meant about that. As far as when older kids grow up, I put insist on respect, even when you're going through the tussles and the tug of war about things, insist on respect for both mom, for dad, and for siblings. Even the eye rolling, you know, it's not respectful. I just think that's a good thing to try to kind of wrap around, you know, that the bottom line is going to be love and respect. That's one thing. Got many more.
Well, I'll just give the one thing. Probably the most painful part of parenting for me was that lovely little daughter actually didn't like me very much. And she'll say that to this day. We're in love with each other now, but and she says, "Oh, Mom, I didn't really hate you till I was a senior in high school, but I have journals to prove it was 5th grade and on." And journaling was my way of pouring that out before God, because I didn't know what to do. And what made it worse is she loved her dad. Now, some of you may have daddy's girls, and you know, actually, my daughter has one of those now. And it's almost hard for me to watch sometimes, because I know what that felt like as a mom, you know, and I couldn't figure out the reason. Sometimes I'd say, "Honey, what is it about me that bothers you so much? Let me see if I can fix something." She would never answer. She told me years later she didn't even know what it was. We were just breathing the same air. And I didn't know what it was. So, but when she was in college, she went to a Bible study, and she heard a mom just pouring out her heart about how her daughter was so mean to her. And afterwards, she had never heard it from another woman, and she went up to her afterwards and said, "I just want you to know that I was that girl. And I treated my mom horribly, and I didn't even know why. My mom would ask me, 'What can I do?' And I didn't even know why. But I just want you to know that I want to give you hope, that it will change, because I love my mom now. And I don't know why that happens, but if it happens to you and I'm still around, come talk to me. I will comfort you." And anyway, I just think talking to God via journal or staying connected to your partner at that time, even if they're the preferred parent, stay connected. Because I was always grateful that he was at least holding on to her, even if I couldn't. So, anyway.
I have a whole list of different things about what I worried about and what I shouldn't have worried about.
This kind of, you guys might think this is funny how I didn't even think about this, but I said I worried about their self, is this on? You hear it? It seems like it was on.
like it went quiet when we look at it.
I can speak really loud, I got the gift of way louder
It
than
says
everyone
dead
else.
battery.
Okay. I'm a loud talker. I worried about their salvation, and in a weird way. I wanted them so much when they were little and they were going through Awana to say that little prayer, to say, to ask God into their heart, more for like an insurance policy, that I just wanted to know that they were going to heaven. And it sounds really strange because it's not a one-time deal, and it just because a child accepts Christ in their heart as a little child doesn't mean that they're gonna have a smooth road all their life. And so that's why what I was laughing about, that I was thinking, oh, it's all covered, I can check that off the list that my kids are saved. And, but I wanted to, instead of knowing that it takes a lifetime of transformation, and my kids have gone up and down in their spiritual commitments and stuff, they were, I made sure they were involved a lot, growing up with different programs. Blackhawk at that time it looks a lot different now than it did then, but they had youth groups and they had different things like that. They had Sunday school for kids longer in life than they do now, but, so I made sure they were involved. That in junior high, 2 of my 3 kids were really rebellious, starting junior high up to high school, were very rebellious, and so I was like, just trying to hold on. I'm kind of coupling those 2 things, hold on, going, all Steve and I could do at some point was just be on the same page and praying for their safety, for those 2 of the kids, their safety and their choices, because sometimes we didn't know where they were, what they were doing, and so, in the long term, and my daughter, our oldest did not fit the oldest thing about responsible and all that type of stuff. She was kind of the flip type thing. To this day, I'm the closest to her. She didn't want any part of me at that time. She resented any of me, calling her out on behavior and things of that sort. And now she almost calls me like, she's the one who moved out to Denver. She calls to me, talks to me about the silliest of things and such. And I just see God's hand in her life, and how he protected her from, I don't know what harm she was. I just can vaguely think about stuff that she was involved in, and just thank God that he brought her through somewhat unscathed. But she is a wonderful person now, and carrying, pouring into little life of the children and stuff. So I guess I just talk about grace and being grace-filled with your children, no matter what choices they make, knowing that you try to love them unconditionally, and knowing, because that's how God did us. My struggles might have been different than my children's, but I still was rebellious against God. But it was His grace that came through, and so right now, I know you think your life is hard. It is. I can remember that time, but it gets trickier when they have more autonomy and you're not their favorite person, and they don't want to always give you a hug type stuff. And so brace yourselves for those older years, and remember that these are wonderful years that you are in. But just keep praying, because you don't know the term. But God was faithful in my case. I have 3 very responsible children now, and 2 of them, as I said, I didn't know some of their choices, whether they would be living. So just keep praying on that. What was the other thing? A book. It may sound very dated right now, but there was a book that I read. It said, "Get out of my life, but first can you take me to the mall?" And that was from a girl standpoint. And they were talking about boys that they just kind of go up in the room and shut the door for 4 years or whatever, and they just don't want, so boys and girls, I know that might sound gender specific in how they were raised, but there are some truth to that. So if you can remember that book, it was comical in its title, but it had some very good insights on your children. As far as that too, get involved, get to know if your kids are, my kids were high into sports stuff, and so we were busy with sports, but in doing that, we got to know parents, and get to know the parents of your kids' friends, especially when they are older, because I got calls in the middle of the night from people going, do you know where my daughter is? Because they knew that they could call me and say, we don't know where she is, she hasn't shown up. And so have those connections so that you can rely on one another and you can kind of have eyes on it for each other if your kids do struggle. Maybe your kids won't struggle, but if they do, or if it's, you know, you have that, it's not just you and your husband or you doing that, you've got a whole village to do that. Let your kids know that you care. You know, try to set the precedence that you can talk about anything. I know you guys have so much more on your plates what people are talking about than they did even when our kids were being raised. And so there's so much that these kids struggle with. So try to have an open, non-judgmental facade or you know, think that they can come and talk to you, and try to exhibit that and, you know, show them your struggles and stuff like that. Be real with your kids so that they know when they struggle, they can be real with you. And again, we try to, you know, it wasn't that our kids didn't have ramifications for their choices. I was just glad that someone else was giving them the ramifications. So if it was legal type stuff, you're paying the fine. You're doing this, you're doing whatever you got caught doing, but we would still love them, you know, and we'd say, you're responsible for that, but let's work through that, and we talk about ways, you know, to go around that. And so I think that's helped us in the long run, because we have a very functioning family, family who loves to spend time with each other. So that was a big goal, and I said I wanted my kids to love each other. Eventually they did. My oldest two would lock each other out of the house and chase each other with padlocks and try to hit them. So it went from that type of thing to I want to come up and watch my son make maple syrup and all that type of stuff. And so there's hope as long as you keep fostering things.
And in honor of St. Patrick's Day, the gold at the end of the rainbow is grandparenthood.
I want grandchildren. I don't have them.
Thank you so much, ladies. Is there any other final thoughts that you wanted to share before we wrap up?
There is a book called Siblings Without Rivalry, and I thought it was very good, very helpful. Still on the market.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
I don't know why, Laura, I wish I could honestly just be like, okay, take my kids. I'm gonna literally sit at your feet. I have about 20 more questions to ask you. One of the ways that I learn is just through stories. And so just hearing from you guys and your experience, I mean, this was powerful. It really was, just to